The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep hum. Inside, hundreds of alien beings sat in curved rows that stretched up toward a crystal dome ceiling. The air smelled strange, a mix of different atmospheres and chemical. Signatures from dozens of worlds. Commander Jake Riley stepped through the entrance first. He wore his best Earth military uniform, dark blue with silver buttons. His boots clicked against the smooth floor as he walked. Behind him came something that made several aliens gasp and move back in their seats. Thane Gorak was huge, nearly 8 feet tall with gray rock-like skin that looked like armor. His arms were thick as tree trunks and his hands ended in claws. Small spikes ran along his backbone and his yellow eyes glowed softly in the chamber light. Each step he took made a heavy thud that echoed through the quiet room. The two beings could not look more different. Jake was average height for a human, with brown hair and quick dark eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His movements were smooth and careful. Gorak moved like a living mountain, slow but powerful, his massive head turning left and right as he studied the other delegates. The representatives from the Deathworlds, Earth and Vorthok Prime, announced a tall, thin alien at the center podium. This was Council Speaker Velion, whose pale blue skin seemed to glow under the chamber lights. His voice carried clearly through hidden speakers. They will stand before this assembly to answer for their species. Jake and Gorak walked to 2 spots marked on the floor near the center of the room. Around them, alien faces stared down from every direction. Some looked curious, others seemed afraid, and many appeared disgusted. "Look at them," whispered a delegate with purple fur and 6 arms. "How did such violent creatures even develop space travel? Their worlds should have killed them long ago," added another alien that looked like a walking crystal formation. "Nothing intelligent should survive such hostile places." Jake heard the whispers but kept his face calm. He had expected this reaction. Earth had been classified as a Class 12 death world after the first contact surveys. The Council scientists could not believe that humans had evolved on a planet with such extreme weather, dangerous animals, and deadly diseases. Gorak's reaction was different. His yellow eyes narrowed and a low rumble came from deep in his chest. On Vorthok Prime, insults were answered with action. But he had given his word to follow diplomatic rules, while in Council Space. Speaker Velion raised one of his 4 arms for silence. "These beings come from worlds that no civilized species could survive. Their very existence suggests they have developed through constant violence and struggle. We must determine if they pose a threat to galactic peace." The chamber filled with murmurs of agreement. Jake noticed how the other delegates nodded and looked at each other with knowing expressions. It was clear they had already made up their minds before the hearing even started. "The human representative will speak first," Velion announced. Jake stepped forward. He had practiced this moment many times during the long journey to the council. "Station, honored speaker and respected delegates," he began, his voice steady and clear. "I come here not as a threat, but as a representative of a species that wishes to join the galactic community in peace." Several aliens made sounds that Jake guessed were laughs. One delegate, who looked like a large flower with tentacles, spoke up without waiting for permission. "Peace? Your species has been at war with itself for thousands of years. Your planet's history is written in blood." "That is true," Jake admitted. "Humans have fought many wars, but we have also learned from our mistakes. We have built great cities, created beautiful art, and reached for the stars. Conflict taught us the value of cooperation." "Cooperation?" The flower being's petals fluttered with what seemed like amusement. "Your military records show you have weapons that can destroy entire continents. What cooperation exists in such destruction?" Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his voice level. "We develop those weapons to protect ourselves and others. Sometimes the threat of force prevents greater violence. We hope never to use them. Now it was Gorak's turn. The massive being stepped forward, his claws clicking on the floor. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough like grinding stone. I am Thane Gorak of Clan Ironback, chosen to speak for all Vorthakians. We too are called violent by those who have never faced true hardship. The chamber grew quieter. Even through translation devices, Gorak's voice carried a weight that made everyone listen. On Vorthek Prime, the storms can tear flesh from bone. The ground shakes and splits without warning. Creatures with teeth like swords hunt in packs. We survived because we learned to stand together. A Vorthakian alone dies quickly. A clan of Vorthakians can face anything. And yet, interrupted a delegate who looked like a living metal sculpture, your species worships strength above all else. Your society is built on dominance and conquest. Gorak's eyes flashed dangerously. We honor strength because weakness kills. But true strength protects the weak, not destroys them. A warrior who bullies those smaller than himself is no warrior at all. Jake found himself nodding at Gorak's words. Despite their different backgrounds, both species had learned similar lessons about survival and honor. Speaker Velion tapped his podium with a crystal rod. These are pretty words, but words cost nothing. Your species come from worlds that breed violence. How can we trust being shaped by such harsh environments? Perhaps, Jake said quietly, you should ask why your own worlds never faced such challenges. How did you become so comfortable, so certain of your safety? The question hung in the air like an unexpected thunderclap. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was not the kind of response they expected from a primitive Deathworlder. Gorak added his own question. We have studied your records since first contact. Many worlds in Council space have resources that could help struggling colonies. Yet these resources remain unused while entire populations suffer. Why? Speaker Velion's blue skin seemed to pale slightly. That is not the subject of this hearing. We are here to evaluate your species, not discuss Council policies. Are they not connected? Jake asked, his voice still polite but with an edge that had not been there before. You judge us for surviving difficult worlds, but you have never had to make the hard choices that survival requires. The chamber buzzed with confused whispers. The delegates had expected to intimidate two representatives from backward worlds. Instead, they found themselves being questioned by beings who seemed to understand more about galactic politics than they had expected. Gorak looked directly at Jake for the first time since entering the chamber. In that glance, something passed. Between them, recognition perhaps, or understanding. Both had walked into this room expecting hostility, but neither had expected to find someone who might understand their position. The first session of what was supposed to be a simple evaluation was becoming something else entirely, and both Jake and Gorak could sense that the other delegates were beginning to realize they had seriously underestimated the intelligence and insight of the two Deathworlders standing before them. The second day of hearings began with Speaker Velion looking less confident than before. Word had spread through the station about the unexpected questions from the Deathworld representatives. More delegates filled the chamber seats, curious to see what would happen next. Jake stepped forward when called, carrying a small data pad in his hands. Honored Speaker, before we continue discussing our supposed violent nature, I have some questions about Council records that puzzle me. Velun's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. This hearing is not about Council business. You are here to prove your species can integrate peacefully into galactic society. I understand, Jake replied politely. But to integrate properly, we need to understand how the system works. For example, I noticed that Kepler Colony requested emergency food supplies 3 years ago. The request was approved, but the supplies never arrived. Could you explain what happened? The chamber grew quiet. Several delegates exchanged worried glances. Kepler colony was in a distant sector that few people paid attention to. How did you access those records? Demanded a delegate who looked like a walking tree with silver bark. That information requires high-level clearance. Jake smiled slightly. All emergency requests are public record, according to Council Charter Section 47. I simply read what was freely available. Though I did have to cross-reference shipping manifests to track the supplies. Gorak stepped beside Jake, his massive frame casting a shadow across the floor. My people also have questions. The mining rights for Asteroid Belt 7 Alpha were supposed to rotate between colonies every 5 years. Instead, they have remained with the same company for 30 years. Why? Speaker Velion's pale blue skin seemed to grow more pale. These are complex administrative matters that new members would not understand. Perhaps you could help us understand, Jake said, his tone still respectful but firm. The company holding those mining rights, Galactic Resources, Inc., has the same registration address as your Chief of Staff's investment portfolio. Is that a coincidence? The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Several delegates stood up, talking rapidly among themselves. Others pulled out their own data devices, apparently checking the information Jake had mentioned. This is inappropriate. Velen banged his crystal rod against the podium. These hearings are not about financial records. Gorak's deep voice cut through the noise. On Vorthik Prime, we have a saying, a crooked tree cannot hide its bent branches. If you judge us for our nature, should we not judge you for yours? A young delegate with green scales and large eyes raised her hand. Speaker Velion, I would like to hear the answers to these questions. If there are administrative issues, should they not be addressed? Delegate Kira, you are out of order. Velen snapped. Return to your seat. But Kira remained standing. Actually, I have been reviewing the data they mentioned. The emergency supplies for Kepler colony were marked as delivered, but the shipping records show they were rerouted to Luxury Station Prime. Those supplies included medical equipment for sick children. The chamber's noise level grew louder. More delegates were pulling up records on their devices, following the trail that Jake and Gorak had discovered. Jake pulled up another file on his datapad. There are other irregularities. The scientific research grant for developing clean energy was awarded to a company that has no research facilities. The money disappeared into administrative costs that seemed to lead back to several council members' private accounts. Where did you get this information? Demanded a delegate who looked like a giant insect with jeweled wings. These records are classified. No, Gorak rumbled. We checked the classification levels carefully. These are all public documents. They are just scattered across different databases so no one thinks to connect them. Unless someone looks very carefully, Jake nodded. My species developed something called investigative journalism. When people in power make mistakes, reporters dig through public records to find the truth. It seems this skill is uncommon in the galaxy. A delegate from the back rows stood up. His species looked like living crystal, and his voice rang like wind chimes. I represent the mining colony of Zerion 4. 3 years ago, we requested new air recycling equipment. We were told no funds were available. But according to these records, there was plenty of money. It went to upgrading the entertainment systems on luxury stations instead. This is absurd. The Leon's voice was getting higher. We cannot run galactic government based on the demands of every minor colony. Minor colony? The crystal delegate's voice became sharper. My people have been mining rare elements for the council for over a century. Elements that power your luxury stations and private ships. How are we minor? Gorak pulled out his own data device, which looked tiny in his massive claws. We found similar patterns in military contracts. Ships ordered for protecting trade routes were diverted to provide security for council members' private estates. Pirates attack merchant vessels while council fleets guard empty mansions. Jake continued the thought. And when colonies request protection, they are told to form their own defense forces. But they cannot buy weapons because the same companies that overcharge for basic supplies control the arms trade. The young delegate Kira was now openly checking her own records. The education funding for developing worlds has been cut by 60% over the last decade. But the budget for council ceremonies and celebrations has tripled. Children on dozens of worlds cannot get proper schooling, Jake said, his voice growing harder. But there is always money for parties and parades. A delegate who looked like a walking flower spoke up. How long have you two been investigating these matters? Since we received our invitations to this hearing, Gorak answered. We wanted to understand the system we were being asked to join. We expected to find corruption, but not so much of it. Expected corruption? Velun sputtered. That shows your violent, suspicious nature. Jake laughed, a sound that surprised many in the chamber. Speaker Velion, on Earth we have another saying, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Any system without proper oversight will develop these problems. It is not suspicious to look for them, it is smart. Your council charter promises equality and justice for all member species, Gorak added. But your actions show favoritism for the wealthy and powerful. You accuse us of being violent, but you use economic violence against the weak every day. More delegates were standing now, some demanding answers, others calling for investigations. The carefully controlled hearing was turning into something very different. Speaker Velion tried to regain control. These accusations are baseless. The council has maintained peace and prosperity for thousands of years. Peace for whom? Asked the crystal delegate. Prosperity for whom? The records these Deathworlders found show that most member worlds have grown poorer, while a few core worlds have grown richer. Jake looked around the chamber, seeing the growing anger and confusion on alien faces. We came here expecting to be judged for surviving harsh worlds. Instead, we found a system that creates harsh conditions for others. Perhaps the question is not whether Deathworlders can join galactic civilization. Perhaps the question is whether galactic civilization is worth joining. The chamber exploded into chaos as delegates began shouting questions and demands. Speaker Velion banged his crystal rod desperately, but the noise only grew louder. The hearing that was meant to evaluate two primitive species had become an examination of the council itself. Speaker Velion called for a recess after the chaos reached its peak. Security officers moved through the chamber, trying to calm down angry delegates who were demanding immediate investigations. Jake and Gorak were escorted to a small waiting room near the main chamber. The room was simple, with two chairs that looked too small for Gorak and a table with water dispensers designed for different species. Jake poured himself a cup of clear liquid while Gorak examined a container filled with mineral chunks. That went better than expected, Jake said, sitting down carefully. The chair creaked under his weight. Though he was much lighter than his companion, Gorak crunched on a piece of metal-rich mineral, his jaw working slowly. Your people are skilled at finding hidden truths. On my world, we solve problems with strength, but sometimes the enemy hides where strength cannot reach. Your questions about the mining rights were perfect, Jake replied, direct and impossible to ignore. My people would call that cutting through the nonsense. The massive alien tilted his head, studying Jake with those glowing yellow eyes. You are not what I expected from the briefings about humans. They said your species was emotional and unpredictable. Jake laughed. They told us Vorthakians were mindless brutes who only understood violence. Seems like both our species got some bad publicity. Bad publicity? Gorak's translator struggled with the phrase for a moment. Ah, yes, false reputation. This is common in galactic politics, I think. Jake leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Gorak, I need to ask you something. How much of this corruption did you know about before we started digging? The big alien was quiet for a long moment, crunching another mineral. My people suspected. We are not stupid, though. The council thinks we are. When we applied for membership, we were told our technology was too primitive. But we had already developed faster engines than most council ships. Same here, Jake nodded. Earth was told we needed to accept guidance from more advanced civilizations. But our computers are faster than theirs, and our materials science is centuries ahead in some areas. They want us weak, Gorak said simply. Dependent, easier to control. Jake stood up and walked to the small window that showed the council station's central hub. Ships from dozens of worlds moved through the traffic patterns, but he noticed that the newest and largest vessels all came from the same few systems. It's not just about keeping us weak, he said. Look at the pattern we found. Resources flow from outer worlds to core worlds. New technologies are suppressed unless they benefit the established powers. Even emergency aid gets redirected to luxury projects. Gorak joined him at the window, his massive frame blocking most of the light. On Vorthik Prime, we call this feeding the strong while starving the weak. It is what cowards do when they gain power. The question is, what do we do about it? Jake asked. We came here hoping to join their system. But their system is rotten. We change it, Gorak said without hesitation. Or we build something better. Jake turned to look at his unlikely companion. That's a big job for two representatives from primitive worlds. The council has thousands of years of established power. Thousands of years of making the same mistakes. Gorak corrected. They have grown soft and lazy. They think their power makes them untouchable. You know, Jake said slowly, our species might be more alike than anyone realized. Humans have a long history of overthrowing corrupt governments, usually through revolution. Vorthakians prefer direct confrontation, Gorak rumbled. Challenge the leader, defeat them in combat, take their place. Unfortunately, we can't just challenge Speaker Velen to a duel, Jake pointed out, though the idea has appeal. Gorak's laugh sounded like rocks tumbling down a mountain. Perhaps not. But we can challenge their lies with truth. We can expose their weakness with strength. And we can show the galaxy what real leadership looks like. Jake felt a strange excitement building in his chest. You're talking about forming an alliance. Earth and Vorthik Prime working together. Not just our worlds, Gorak said, his eyes gleaming. Did you see how many delegates were listening to us in there? The young one, Kira. The crystal being from the mining colony. They are hungry for change. There are probably dozens of worlds that have been getting the same treatment we have, Jake realized. Kept weak, kept dependent, told they need council guidance while their resources get stolen. We find them, Gorak said firmly. We share what we have learned. We build a coalition of the ignored and the exploited. Jake walked back to the table and pulled out his datapad. I've been thinking about this since yesterday. Look at these numbers. He showed Gorak a series of charts and graphs. The Council controls about 40% of galactic territory, but they claim to represent 90% of all intelligent species. Gorak studied the display, his expression growing darker. The other 50% of species live in the 40% of territory the Council doesn't control. Exactly. And most of them are classified as developing or primitive worlds that need Council protection. But protection from what? Pirates that the Council refuses to stop. Economic problems that Council policies create. It is a protection racket, Gorak said, using a term his translator had learned from human criminal databases. Pay us or bad things happen to you. And sometimes bad things happen anyway. A soft chime indicated that the recess was almost over. Jake and Gorak looked at each other, both realizing that they had crossed a line. They were no longer just representatives trying to gain membership in the galactic community. They were becoming something else. If we do this, Jake said quietly, There's no going back. They'll try to destroy us. Our worlds could be cut off from galactic trade, marked as hostile, maybe even attacked. Gorak stood to his full height, his spikes catching the light from the window. My ancestors faced creatures with fangs like swords and storms that could tear cities apart. Your ancestors survived ice ages and plagues and wars that covered continents. Do you think we should fear politicians and bureaucrats? Jake smiled, feeling the same determination that had driven humans to explore every corner of their dangerous world. No, I don't think we should. Then we are agreed. Gorak extended one massive hand. Earth and Vorthik Prime stand together. And any other world that wants real freedom instead of comfortable slavery. Jake shook the offered hand, feeling the incredible strength in Gorak's grip, but also the careful control that kept those claws from drawing blood. Agreed. Let's go back in there and really give them something to worry about. As they walked back toward the chamber doors, both beings felt the weight of what they were starting. They had come seeking acceptance. Instead, they had found each other, and possibly the beginning of something that would change the galaxy forever. Within hours of the hearing's dramatic end, something unexpected began happening across the galaxy. The words spoken by Jake and Gorak spread faster than anyone had anticipated. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent messages. Underground networks shared encrypted files. News services picked up fragments of information about corruption in the highest levels of galactic government. On the mining world of Zarian 4, the crystal delegate who had spoken up during the hearing held an emergency meeting with his planetary council. His name was Brix, and he had represented his people for 20 years without ever questioning council decisions. Now he stood before his fellow miners with data files that Jake and Gorak had quietly shared during the recess. Look at these numbers, Brix said, his crystalline voice ringing through the underground chamber where his people gathered. For 50 years, we have mined rare elements worth billions of credits. The council told us the market price was falling, so our payments got smaller each year. But the real market price has been rising steadily. The miners looked at each other with growing anger. Their world was harsh, with toxic air and crushing gravity that only crystalline beings could survive. They had worked incredibly hard to extract materials that powered the galaxy's technology. Learning that they had been cheated for decades made their anger burn like the molten core of their planet. On Kepler Colony, families who had lost children during the medical supply shortage 3 years ago learned the truth about where their emergency aid had gone. The supplies meant to save young lives had been redirected to luxury stations where wealthy aliens used advanced medical technology for cosmetic improvements. Lisa Park, the human medical officer who had watched helplessly as children died from treatable diseases, sent desperate messages to every news network she could reach. They let babies die so rich people could get prettier, she transmitted. The medicines were already paid for, already shipped, and they stole them. Similar discoveries were happening on dozens of worlds. The agricultural planet Greenfall learned that food meant for famine relief had been sold to exclusive restaurants. The technical world of New Geneva found that their advanced computer designs had been stolen and patented by council-connected companies. The peaceful world of Harmony discovered that their requests for protection from pirates had been ignored while council ships guarded the private estates of corrupt officials. Back on the council station, Speaker Velione was dealing with the worst crisis of his long career. His communication system was overwhelmed with angry messages from member worlds. His security chief knocked on his office door with increasingly bad news. "Sir, we have a problem," the security chief said. He was a tall, thin alien with gray skin and too many eyes. "The investigation requests are multiplying. 17 worlds have demanded immediate audits of their resource contracts." Velen walked to his office window, looking out at the central hub where ships continued their normal traffic patterns. But he knew that normalcy was an illusion. "Can we deny the requests?" Not legally, sir. Under Section 23 of the Council Charter, any member world can request a full financial audit with just cause. And these corruption allegations definitely qualify as just cause. What about the 2 Deathworlders? Can we arrest them for spreading false information? The security chief checked his datapad. That's another problem, sir. Everything they revealed came from public records. They haven't broken any laws. And arresting them now would look like we're trying to silence critics. Meanwhile, Jake and Gorak were not sitting quietly in their quarters. They had spent the night working with Delegate Kira and several other reform-minded representatives, sharing information and coordinating responses to the growing crisis. Jake sat at a small table, covered with datapads and communication devices. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his mind was sharp and focused. "The response is bigger than we expected," he told Gorak. "We're getting support from worlds we've never heard of." Gorak stood near the window, his massive frame silhouetted against the stars. "My people have a saying, when the dam breaks, even small stones can change the river's course. We cracked their wall of lies. Now the pressure is doing the rest." A soft chime indicated an incoming priority message. Jake activated his communication device, and the face of a young alien with blue skin and large ears appeared on the screen. "This is Captain Rex from the Outer Rim Defense Force," the alien said urgently. "We've been monitoring Council communications since your hearing yesterday. They're planning to have you arrested on charges of sedition and inciting rebellion." Jake and Gorak exchanged glances. They had expected this possibility. "When?" Gorak asked simply. "Within the next few hours. But that's not all. We've intercepted orders to several Council fleets. They're being positioned near Earth and Vorthek Prime. If you're arrested, they plan to blockade your home worlds and cut off all trade." Jake felt his blood run cold. "They're going to punish our entire species for what we've done here." "It appears so," Captain Rex continued. "But we have some good news too. The Outer Rim Defense Force is officially withdrawing from Council authority as of 1 hour ago. We're not the only ones. The Free Traders Alliance has also declared independence from Council jurisdiction." Gorak's eyes began to glow brighter, a sign of excitement in his species. "How many fleets are we talking about?" 17 independent defense forces so far, representing 43 worlds. It's growing every hour. Jake realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. They're seceding from the Council entirely? More than that. Captain Rex smiled. "We're forming our own alliance, the Free Worlds Coalition. And we'd like Earth and Vorthek Prime to be founding members." Before Jake or Gorak could respond, another communication came through. This time it was Delegate Kira, calling from inside the Council chamber. "Emergency session starting now," she said quickly. "Velion is demanding immediate action against you both. But there's resistance. Nearly a third of the delegates are refusing to participate. Some are walking out entirely." Jake could hear shouting in the background of Kira's transmission. The careful order of the Council chamber was breaking down. "We need to be there," Gorak said. "If they want to arrest us, let them try it in front of the galaxy." "Are you sure?" Jake asked. "Once we walk back in there, we're committed. No turning back." Gorak's laugh rumbled through the room. "My friend, there was no turning back the moment we started asking questions. Now we finish what we started." Jake stood up, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. They had come to join the galactic community as junior members. Instead, they were about to help tear it apart and build something new from the pieces. "Then let's go face the Council one more time," Jake said. "And let's make sure the whole galaxy is watching when we do it." As they prepared to leave their quarters, both Jake and Gorak knew that the next few hours would determine the future of galactic civilization. The corruption they had exposed was spreading like wildfire, and the old order was crumbling faster than anyone had imagined possible. The council chamber had never seen anything like it. Half the delegate seats stood empty, as representatives from dozens of worlds had simply walked out during the night. Those who remained were split into angry groups, shouting at each other across the curved rows of seats. Security officers stood nervously at every entrance, unsure whether they should be protecting the delegates or arresting them. Speaker Velion stood at his podium, his pale blue skin now almost gray with stress. His forearms gestured wildly as he tried to restore order, but his crystal rod could not compete with the chaos that filled the chamber. Jake and Gorak walked through the main entrance together, and the noise level dropped dramatically. All eyes turned toward the two beings who had started this galactic crisis. Some delegates looked at them with hatred, others with respect, and many with simple curiosity about what would happen next. "The criminals return," Velion announced, his voice amplified through the chamber speakers. "Security, arrest these two immediately for charges of sedition, inciting rebellion, and threatening galactic peace." The security officers moved forward, but then something unexpected happened. Delegate Kira stood up from her seat, followed by the crystal being Brix from Zarian 4. Then another delegate rose, and another, until more than 100 beings were standing in silent protest. Under Council Law 47B, no representative can be arrested during official proceedings without a formal vote, Kira called out clearly. "I demand such a vote be held immediately." Velin's eyes darted around the chamber, counting the standing delegates. "Very well. All in favor of arresting these Deathworld representatives." Less than half the remaining delegates raised their hands or tentacles or other appendages. The motion failed dramatically. Jake stepped forward to the center of the chamber. "Floor, honored delegates, we came here seeking membership in galactic civilization. What we found was not civilization, but organized theft. Not peace, but systematic oppression of the weak by the powerful." "Lies!" shouted a delegate who looked like a walking flower. "The council has maintained order for thousands of years." Gorak moved beside Jake, his massive presence commanding attention. "Order built on suffering is not order. It is tyranny with better manners." A new voice spoke from the chamber entrance. "Perhaps we should hear what the affected worlds have to say about this order." Everyone turned to see Captain Rex entering with a group of beings that Jake and Gorak had never seen before. They wore simple uniforms that identified them as representatives of the Free Worlds Coalition. "You have no authority here," Velion sputtered. "This is a closed council session." "Not anymore," Captain Rex replied calmly. "As of this morning, 67 worlds have formally withdrawn from council authority. We represent over 200 million beings who are tired of being robbed in the name of galactic peace." The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos felt different. It was not angry confusion, but the sound of something breaking apart that had been held together too long by force and lies. Dr. Lisa Park stepped forward from the group. Jake recognized her as the doctor from Kepler Colony who had lost patients during the medical supply scandal. "I watched children die because medicine meant for them was sold to rich aliens who wanted cosmetic surgery. How is that peace? How is that civilization?" A farmer from Greenfall spoke next. "My people starved while food we grew was served at council parties. We were told there was no money for emergency aid, but there was always money for celebrations and ceremonies." One by one, representatives from worlds across the galaxy stepped forward to tell their stories. Mining colonies that had been cheated for decades. Technical worlds whose innovations had been stolen. Agricultural worlds whose people went hungry while their crops fed the wealthy. Defense forces that had been ignored when they requested help. Against pirates. Speaker Veling tried repeatedly to restore order, but his voice was lost in the growing tide of testimony. The careful structure of council authority was crumbling in real time as world after world rejected the system that had exploited them. Jake looked around the chamber and realized that something historic was happening. This was not just a political crisis, but the birth of something entirely new. "We propose a new system," Jake announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "Not rule by the few over the many, but cooperation between equals. Not extraction of wealth from the weak, but mutual aid and shared prosperity." Gorak stepped forward. "The Free Worlds Coalition offers membership to any world that wants true freedom instead of comfortable slavery. Equal votes for all members. Open records for all transactions. No member world left behind when others prosper." Delegate Kira stood up again. "What about trade? What about defense? How can dozens of separate worlds coordinate without central authority?" "The same way Earth's nations learn to work together," Jake replied. "Through treaties and agreements freely entered into. Through trade partnerships that benefit everyone involved. Through defense alliances that protect all members equally." "And when disagreements arise?" asked Brix from Zarian 4. "We talk," Gorak said simply. "We negotiate. We compromise. We do not allow a few powerful worlds to dictate terms to everyone." Else, Speaker Velion made one last attempt to maintain control. "This is madness. Without council authority, the galaxy will descend into chaos and war." Captain Rex stepped forward with a datapad in his hands. "Actually, our preliminary analysis suggests the opposite. Most galactic conflicts over the last century were caused by council policies that favored some worlds over others. Remove the source of inequality, and you remove most causes of war." A delegate Jake had not seen before stood up in the back rows. She was small and blue with wings that sparkled in the chamber lights. "The scientific collective has run computer models based on the proposed free world system. Preliminary results show increased trade, reduced conflict, and faster technological development when knowledge is shared freely instead of hoarded by a few." Jake felt a surge of hope. The galaxy's best minds were already working on solutions to make the new system succeed. "All worlds that wish to join the Free Worlds Coalition are welcome," Jake announced. "All worlds that prefer to remain with the Council are free to do so. But no world will be forced to stay in a system that does not serve its people." The chamber filled with delegates moving toward the exits, some to join the new coalition, others to return to their worlds and consider their options. The old council was not technically dissolved, but it was clearly no longer the dominant power in galactic politics. Speaker Velion stood alone at his podium, watching his carefully constructed empire of corruption fall apart around him. The two Deathworlders he had tried to intimidate had not just exposed his crimes, but had offered the galaxy a better alternative. As Jake and Gorak walked out of the chamber together, surrounded by representatives from dozens of worlds ready to build something new, they knew that they had accomplished something greater than joining galactic civilization. They had helped create a new kind of civilization entirely, one based on cooperation instead of exploitation. The galaxy would never be the same.